Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the ReluTech podcast. I am very excited today to be joined by a colleague who has been at this company as long as I've been here. He has a lot of experience in the data center and cloud space, but really what we're going to focus on today is a little bit about the hardware game, because a lot of people stop thinking about the hardware in their data centers when they start focusing on the cloud, a topic we discuss regularly. I wanted to bring on an expert in the topic, why this data center stuff is still important as you move to the cloud. So, Josiah, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Youngblood. Super excited to be here. Excited to talk some data center stuff. Let's do it.
Yeah. So just to get a little background in, Josiah, walk our viewers through your background, what led you into this space.
Yeah. And it's kind of a wild story because I'm not someone that, in high school or college years, if you asked me, I would be doing anything in IT. I probably would have laughed at you. But here I am. Let's see, how do I condense this story to make it shorter? In 2012-ish timeframe, I met a guy named Mark Metz, who is our founder. And we met outside of work. We were actually going to the same gym at the time, working out, and that's how we met each other. And if you know anything about Mark, he's a serial entrepreneur. Right, the guy starts companies. It seems like everything he touches turns.
Half the time I find out about a new company like weeks after it started.
I know. Serial entrepreneur. That's the best way to describe him. But I was recently married, looking for a job, and he said, "Hey, I'm starting a company, looking for salespeople. You should come work for me." And at first I was like, well, what are you selling? And he was like, it's like IT, like computers and stuff. And he was talking to me as he knew I didn't know anything about it. And I gave him the same response I would have if someone asked me if you would ever work in IT. I kind of laughed at him. I'm like, man, you don't want me anywhere near that. Like, I can barely, work my laptop, right? And he was like, no. He's like, I think you're gonna have what it takes. He's like, we can teach you all this stuff along the way. And I actually, at first, I declined the offer because I just was like, there's no way.
You don't take no for an answer. No way that works.
But yeah, Mark does not take no for an answer. So we went through kind of like a formal interview process, and I was young. My wife was teaching. She had a steady job. So I was like, you know what? Why would I not try this out? So that's when I got started. And funny little known story. My wife had asked me, she was like, well, you agreed to take the job. Like, what's the name of the company? And I was like, I don't even know, because it all happened so fast. And then I asked Mark, and Mark was like, yeah, we're still working on a name. And I was like, oh gosh. What did I get myself into? And then I started like Googling like where the office might be. And I asked Mark, and he was like, yeah, we don't really have an office yet. But I have another company. We're going to work out of that company's office space. And so it was a really funny start. We were totally just a scrappy startup. And I had a blast. It was my first real sales job. And, Mark gave me a printed off stack of Excel phone numbers and contacts. And he said, hey, just call everyone on this list. They were all local Atlanta companies, people Mark had worked with in the past or been connected with. And, I started my career off as an SDR, setting meetings, right? Making hundreds of cold calls a day, and progressed. I picked up the sales side of things, and I started selling, got promoted from an SDR to an AE, started building some good relationships with customers, foundation of trust and doing what we say we were going to do. And that's been the best part about working for Mark in this company, is we're really good at delivering. And if in our space, if you just deliver, good things happen, right? So yeah, we started the company. That was in 2013, I think, when I officially came on. I was in the sales seat for about probably 4 or 5. I can't remember exactly how many years. I told Mark, hey, I'd love to get into management. And he laughed at me because he said, hey, you can do that, but I'm not going to pay you as much to manage as I will to sell.
The classic dilemma.
Yeah, exactly. But I knew that's where I wanted to take my career track. So I did. I took a pretty big pay cut. So any of the listeners out there that would say, hey, I want to get into management, and you want to make that jump from sales to management, just keep in mind, you will take a pay cut.
Every time. You might surpass it eventually, but there might be a chance you don't. Salespeople can make a lot of money.
You're right.
There's more to life than that, though, and sometimes purpose, calling.
Yeah. And that's what I was feeling. I was like, hey, I was making more money than I ever thought I would, that I'd ever planned on. But there was something missing, kind of that intrinsic motivator for me. I really wanted to help people get from point A to point B, and that's why I jumped into that motion. And then fast forward another 5 years, here I am, still at ReluTech. What, 12 years later, leading the org. And we've gone through a bunch of iterations. I'm sure you've talked on previous podcasts. We started out selling third-party maintenance, hardware, and staffing. Then we got into cloud consulting, helping people move from their on-prem data centers to the cloud, primarily AWS. And now we're back kind of in a place where we're this hybrid, right? We're not considered a full-blown cloud consulting company as most people would think of it. And we're not just doing third-party maintenance and hardware deals in the data center. We've created this blend where both come together, which makes us really unique in the marketplace. And I'm really, really excited about where we're going.
Yeah, it's something I'm excited about for this year, because so much of what we do, like you mentioned, is kind of those underserved spaces in the cloud journey. A lot of things have to happen when you're moving to the cloud that don't have necessarily anything to do with the cloud, in the sense of like that direct mentality. I come from the talent side, nerd rabbit. So over here, I've talked a lot about why cloud talent is so important. I think that's easy to wrap your head around. But a lot of people, when they start moving to the cloud, they forget about the data center. It's like, that's the past, right? I'm out of that. And I mean, admittedly, that is many times the goal, right? But the reality is that the cloud's your future. If you're not paying attention to the things happening in your data center, you are going to inhibit your ability to move to the cloud quickly, affordably, and just to the best of your ability.
Well, I would challenge you on that comment, where I don't think it's that the data center, the customer definitely does not forget about the data center.
Yeah.
But their partners that they hire to move them to the cloud, they don't think about it at all, right?
Yeah.
And so they're just focused.
Exactly,
because to them, and we've been that, right? Relus Cloud, we've been the cloud consulting partner where all we care about is, hey, we need to get you to your, end state, which is AWS, Azure, Google, whatever it is. But what we realize is kind of the secret sauce is, there's this problem that customers have that no consulting partner is thinking about. And even if they did think about it, it's not their core competency. So they don't know how to solve that problem in the data center. And we do, which kind of makes it so special, because we're the only ones in the space that are thinking about that data center problem, which the customer is absolutely thinking about. And if you're a cloud consulting partner, or you're AWS, or whoever, and your deal is slowing down, I guarantee you the answer lies in that data center piece.
Yeah, and not necessarily the technical elements of it, because they're thinking about all the opportunities technically that the cloud offers, right? It's more of a financial conversation. To move to the cloud, it's going to cost money. And to keep running this data center that currently hosts this stuff removed in the cloud, that also costs money. And when you're in the middle of that move, you might be paying that money twice in parallel. Yeah. And it's a common problem. So we have a few different solutions we've introduced that try to tackle that. We work with a lot of the different SIs out there who are doing these large cloud migrations, trying to get in really early so that we can, like you mentioned, be able to provide the customer all the leverage possible on their data center to make the move happen that they want to happen. So first one today we're going to talk about is rentals. So I'm going to let you take the floor there and talk a little bit how we use rentals as one way to alleviate financial pressure on the customer who's in a migration.
Yeah. And I can kind of talk about it from a couple different perspectives. Like you mentioned, we partner with a lot of SIs. We partner with AWS. And at first glance, if you're an AWSer or an SI who's doing everything you can to help this customer move to cloud, and then you start talking about hardware, it can be it sounds counterintuitive, right? Like, wait a second, like why would we want to help the customer find hardware? And the reality is you mentioned it. If a customer decides, hey, we want to move to the cloud, that doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not like you just flip a light switch and then boom, all your, everything you're running in your data center is all of a sudden in AWS. 9 times out of 10, these are 12, 24, 36 month long projects. And so we all know a lot can happen in that time frame for a business, right? And not all apps move at the same speed. And so if you have let's call it you're in the retail online business, and your peak seasons are Christmas, right? You get a ton of orders. And you're in the midst of a cloud migration, but you're only halfway through. The business is going to demand, hey, we need more capacity during Christmas, right? We're forecasting, yes, we're moving to AWS, but these apps aren't going to be ready to move by the time we hit Christmas. And we're expecting a huge surge. We're going to have to go buy hardware. What ReluTech does is, instead of that customer going to the OEM, to Dell, HP, IBM, Cisco, whoever it is, and buying net new hardware, that's going to come at a pretty high capital cost. What we'll do is we'll say, hey, we'll just rent you that hardware. So the customer is already in a motion. They've decided to go to cloud. They're already in a motion to move to OpEx. So what we can do is we can break the chain of them having to make another CapEx expenditure to buy hardware for the surge season, and we'll rent it to them for however long they need it, right? So that way the customer's saving money when you're renting the hardware. Let's say, and we can do rentals for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 7 months, whatever it is. But that way the customer doesn't have a hard asset on their books, right? That they're going to have to, write off over however many years. It's just
more accurate to the need, right? Like if this is a temporary need, you need a temporary solution. And the OEMs don't want to sell you a temporary solution. That's not what they're in the business of. So
exactly.
Stopgaps. There's going to be a lot of stopgaps you might need as you're moving to the cloud, and that might require some flexibility that just buying assets in your data center might not really get along with.
Yep. And we can rent. I mean, we've rented everything from access points to fully configured storage arrays, servers, switches. I mean, you name it. If you're buying it from the OEM, we can rent it to you for any duration of time.
Yeah. It's just one way to make it easier, because again, there's going to be a lot of considerations going through here. Your business still has to keep operating. I think that's one thing that really can make moving to the cloud difficult, that you can't stop serving your customers while you're doing it. You don't really, a lot of people think about the old days of the internet where there's downtime, right? There's no downtime anymore. We do this because having parallel workloads and solid handoffs means customers don't experience that. But that means the whole focus is the customer. And if it's expensive, it might make it hard to move to the cloud at the pace you want.
Absolutely.
Or affect the decision of moving there in the first place. So you got to think about the hardware there and how you might be able to be a little bit tactical as you go. The next one that we're going to talk about is buybacks, because this is another way that kind of gets money in the customer's pocket so that they can keep funding this cloud migration.
Yeah. Buybacks is probably what we've done the most of, because if you think about it, a customer has a data center, they're moving to the cloud. Let's say they were moving in 24 months. They get to the end of the 24 months, and the customer kind of puts their hands up, hey, what do I do with all this hardware now, right? We've sunk a ton of money into this over the years. The customer kind of has two options. They can take a very risky option and just throw the stuff in the dumpster, which most probably are not doing. But you could do that. But then you have to worry about your data getting out and someone finding a hard drive from a server they found someplace and hacking into it. And that could just be a disaster.
And there's value there. You're throwing value actually in the trash.
Exactly. And there's a lot of recyclers out there that have these contracts, but they'll come pick it up, but they're actually charging the customer to come pick up the equipment and recycle it for them. And then the
erasure, all that
charged.
stuff.
Yeah. What we will do is we will actually look at that hardware, and this will probably bleed into our next bullet point, and we'll assign a value to that and actually purchase it back from the customer. So what we can do is say, hey, look, you've got 3 data centers, you got 1,000 assets in these 3 data centers. Here's how much we'll give to you today if that hardware is ready to be decommissioned, right? That's the first kind of version of the buyback. Is the customer has hardware, they don't know what to do with it, they're done with it, they're not using it anymore. They need a partner to come in and infuse cash back into their organization. We will do that all day, right? Second option is when they're on that 12, 24, 36-month journey to the cloud. They have hardware, but they're not ready to get off of it yet, but they still could use a cash infusion, right? And so what we'll do, and this is really unique, and this has been a ton of fun to see the flexibility that we've provided customers with this offering. And we call this a purchase leaseback, where we look at all of their hardware that they have today, we'll assign a value to it, right? And let's say, I'll use a real world example. I won't say any names, but we looked at 3 or 4 data centers, had about 15,000 different assets across these 3 data centers. And we valued that hardware at like $60 million. And so we said, hey, Mr. Customer, we will cut you a check today for $60 million. We're going to own that equipment and we're gonna lease it back to you, right? So they're gonna make payments back to us for the duration of their migration. So for the next 36 months, they got a check for $60 million, and they're just paying us back every month until their migration is complete. So in that scenario, the customer's hardware wasn't ready to be decommissioned, but they needed the cash infusion to accelerate their migration, and we were able to provide that. So really, really unique offering that creates a ton of flexibility for the customer and for the provider or the consulting partner that's engaged on the project to move them to the cloud.
And the speed you just described, like what it makes me think of, we were talking a little bit about those parallel workloads, that notion that when you're paying for two things at once is a problem. The quicker you can get through a migration, the cheaper it is. Now, obviously, there's so much stuff you got to move. There are limitations, but the quicker you do it, the cheaper it is. That is the reality of it. This gives you a huge cash infusion at the very beginning of your migration so that you can front load some of these activities that need to happen to then start decommissioning certain assets of yours, getting those bought back, which again, or taking off the maintenance of those things. You start reducing what you're leasing from us. So your actual operational expenditure over time will go down as your cloud operational expenditure increases. So you create this really nice handoff of the finances that accounting departments tend to like, because they don't like to see two parallel costs. They certainly don't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's always a fun conversation, right? Because, most customers have probably heard of companies that buy back hardware. Customers may have heard about, the hardware rental, but what we're doing in this space is super unique. And it's just such a fun conversation to have, because you can see every time we talk to a customer about it, right? The light bulb just goes off. And it's
numbers. It's like really big numbers.
Yeah. And as a sales organization, right. And leading one, like that's the most exciting part of my job, is when you're on the phone with the customer and you see that light bulb moment. And the PLB, the purchase leaseback, we almost always see that light bulb moment go off. So it's a lot of fun, and it's a great offering.
It's huge. I mean, imagine you're about to start a migration. You were just told I can put $60 million in your pocket.
It's crazy.
Puts you in a good mood, to say the least.
Yeah.
Now, there's one other side of this, and that's actually ties into the purchase leaseback a bit, because it's something we've done for a while. Third-party maintenance. So you buy gear, you got to maintain it. And the OEM, they have their prices for that. They're not the only option, though. So walk people through what third-party maintenance is a little bit, and I guess how we approach it, not only just straightforward with customers directly, but also in the context of like a purchase leaseback.
Yeah. Yeah. So maintenance, that's something that, we've been selling since the very beginning. And back to our founder, he's been in this space for, 25, 30 plus years. So it's an offering we know very well. And that is another kind of one of those hidden things that, in a data center transformation to cloud, it's often, I don't want to use the word forgotten, but maybe overlooked, right? Because customers are just so used to paying for maintenance, to your point, right? When a customer buys a piece of hardware, it almost always comes with 2 or 3 years of warranty on it, right? And when I say warranty, that's like a maintenance package.
Yeah.
If it breaks, I call, right? And then they send someone out to come fix it. In these migrations, though, think of it from a customer's perspective. Hey, our plan is to be off of this hardware within 24 months. And so if they look at all of that hardware and the contracts that are tied to it, how many of those contracts are ending between now, when we start the project, and 24 months when we end it, right?
Meaning you'd be unsupported if it did end and you did nothing.
Exactly. So let's say we get halfway through that 24 months and a huge swath of your hardware comes up for renewal. The customer's going to call the OEM, and you made the point earlier. OEMs, they're in the business of selling hardware. They're not in the business of maintaining it, right? If OEM sales reps are awesome, I love them, but when they see a renewal come up, they're going to want to try and find a way to, hey, don't renew this, go buy the latest and greatest, right?
Yeah, if I go to the Volkswagen dealership, they're not trying to sell me a used Volkswagen. Usually, they want me to get the new one with the financing plan.
Right. Exactly. So what we can do, and the reason a lot of these SIs really like us, and the hyperscalers really love us, is because we can kind of help divorce the customer from those really pricey maintenance contracts, right? And we can come in.
It's not usually a short thing. Like if you're on a 24-month migration, that might be shorter than the new contract you have to sign.
Yep, exactly. So we can come in, and 9 times out of 10, we're going to be 50% less than what the OEM is charging them for the same support, right? And one thing I'll say about working with ReluTech, we have there are other third-party maintenance providers out there, right? We're not the only ones in the world, but I think we are potentially one of the only ones in the world that understand the progression that a customer goes through when moving from an on-prem data center to the cloud, because we've been the ones that have actually done that before and done the third-party maintenance, so we know the things to look for. We're not just out there saying, hey, yeah, everything should be moved to ReluTech support. We run through it with a fine-tooth comb and really educate the customer. I was just doing this the other day where customer was moving to the cloud, and I'm having the maintenance conversation with them, and they said, we can't do it because we love the idea of the savings, but we can't do it because we got to have, updates and software and all this stuff. Well, what we're so good at here at ReluTech is looking at those lists and defining what actually needs software, because there's this thing called end of life, right? And so we were able to go back to the customer and say, hey, out of your, 1,000 assets, 432 of them are end of life, and the OEM isn't providing any software updates or patches to these systems. So these are actually, you're right, not all 1,000 assets are a good candidate for ReluTech support, but 432 of them are, and you're overpaying. If you're paying the OEM to support these, they're not providing any value to you beyond what ReluTech.
It's like when you go to a local mechanic versus a dealer mechanic. Again, you go to the dealer, it's more expensive. Yes, they're good at what they do. They are there to be good at what they do. Yeah, they are more expensive.
Yeah, so we do a really good job of educating the customers, when and where third-party maintenance is a good fit. In cloud migrations, it's a conversation that needs to be had. Not everything is going to be a candidate, and quite frankly, we don't want to put anything that shouldn't be on alternative maintenance that can't be, right? Because that's, in the end, that's going to make us look bad. So we're actually very diligent about, educating the customer on, hey, this is a good candidate, and here's why it's a good candidate. We don't just say, hey, yeah, this needs to be put under support. We're going to walk you through why, per the OEM, right? A lot of times we point back to the OEM contract and say, here's what the dates say. Like, you can still support it with the OEM if you want, but there's also $100,000 worth of savings if you move it to ReluTech support for the duration of your migration. So again, it's unleashing, funds that the customer didn't know that they could potentially have to help accelerate, that digital transformation to the cloud.
Yeah, you have a lot of hidden value in that data center. It's something that obviously you're moving to the cloud because maybe they have cool services you can use. Maybe moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model has benefits for you financially. But when it comes down to it, if you have a data center, you have a lot of value that you can unlock for that cloud journey and make this whole thing easier and, again, faster and cheaper. Which the faster you get there and can pursue those ambitions of using the new technology in there, or the savings you can get through an operational expense, the better. And the quicker that you're not running those parallel costs, the better. So again, rentals, buybacks, maintenance, and then kind of the whole thing wrapped together, which is purchase leaseback. Just because that's where we really do all that for your data center. These are a few ways that we're helping people get to the cloud, in ways that aren't necessarily touching the cloud. We obviously do plenty of that too.
Yep.
So, yeah, Josiah?
Well, I was just going to say, it is, some of these offerings might seem counterintuitive to that transformation to the cloud. And I will say, even when we started talking to some of these hyperscalers about it, they kind of didn't know what to think about us. But as we've progressed our relationships, they love it. They eat it up, and they've now realized, like, oh wow, ReluTech, like, again, this side of the cloud migration that a lot of people aren't, or a lot of partners aren't thinking about. Like, this is a real problem for the actual customer. We're just not speaking to it. And now we have this partner called ReluTech that can answer all of those questions and address all of those, what we call barriers to the cloud.
It's huge, whether it be, AWS isn't thinking about the data center reality of their customer and what that's going to inhibit for them, or a partner, the SI, that's going to be moving them along. Where the conversation for us is becoming more clear on why we're important. A lot of the partners we're working with understand you can't wait to bring us in, because if the customer signs a new 3-year maintenance contract, you just lost 3 years of cost savings that could fund the migration. That's the reality. These things are all on time.
And because now it's on their books, they might decide to not move those workloads that are running on those hard assets for 3 years, right? Because now it's stuck on their books, and their CFO might say, we've already paid for this. Like, let's keep it running. We'll move it when we can.
And again, that's a financial organization making a technical decision. So you really can have a lot of issues there. So I think we've had a lot of luck with that in the last year or so, where a lot of the partners we work with understand why it's important to get us in early, to discuss this early.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, it's a huge thing, and it's something that anyone watching, if you have questions about how we offer maintenance, buybacks, whether it be the rentals that we work with for these stopgap solutions, reach out to us. For any of the partners out there in the AWS space who are not aware of what ReluTech does, reach out to us, because we aren't necessarily your competitive partner with other partners. We don't compete with the SIs. We don't compete with most of the other software vendors on AWS. We are complementary to most of the people we've seen out there. So if you are working in this space, reach out to us. Let's see how we can partner together.
I love it. Let's make it happen.
Awesome. Well, Josiah, I'm sure this won't be the last podcast you join, but I appreciate you bringing your insight today. Again, you have a lot of experience in this space, so it is greatly appreciated. I'm sure our viewers appreciate it too.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Until next time.